Okay, guys, so I came across this clip of Richard Dawkins. I think it's a recent one where he talks about the meaning of life. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this for you and just share my thoughts along the way.
Let me ask the silliest or maybe the most important question. What is the meaning of life? What gives your life fulfillment, purpose, happiness, meaning?
From a scientific point of view, the meaning of life is the propagation of DNA, but that's not what I feel. That's not the meaning of my life.
So that's very interesting. Now, obviously, as you'd expect him to start, he talks about science from a scientific perspective. The meaning of life is to propagate your DNA. But then surprisingly, he moves on to saying, well, that's not what I feel the meaning of my life is. That's very interesting coming from a atheist, a naturalist, who pushes the idea of evidence-based truth. He's surely not talking about anything like that right now. All he's speaking about here is his feelings, which seem to, as we're going to see, seem to go against the idea that his scientific view would push.
So the meaning of my life is something which is probably different from yours and different from other people's, but we each make our own meaning. So we set up goals we want to achieve. We want to write a book. We want to do whatever it is we do,
So just bear in mind right now, you said that meaning is something we make up, and our meaning is different for each person. So just think about just keep in mind the idea of meaning is something we make up. I'm going to touch upon this near the end of the video.
Quartet. We want to win a football match. And these are short-term goals, well, maybe even quite long-term goals, which are set up by our brains, which have goal-seeking machinery built into them. But what we don't feel motivated by the desire to pass on our DNA, mostly.
So that's very interesting. Now, what you're saying is that we have goal-seeking machinery that's built into our minds, but at the same time, we're not compelled to pass on our DNA. Well, if you think about it, I don't know about you, but intuitively, let me know your thoughts in the comments, but intuitively, wouldn't it make sense that if we are here to pass on our DNA, our genes, then everything about us, even the goal-seeking machinery which is a part of our psyches, should be geared towards producing goals which help us fulfill that objective, which is passing on our DNA. But that doesn't seem to be what Richard Dawkins seems to be suggesting here. It seems to be contrary to that. But let's continue listening to him.
We have other goals which can be very moving, very important. They could even be called spiritual in some cases. We want to understand the riddle of the universe. We want to understand consciousness. We want to understand how the brain works. These are all noble goals. Some of them can be noble goals anyway.
So he's just referred to all of these goals which have nothing to do with passing on our genes as noble goals, or some of them can be noble goals. Well, hold on a second. But essentially on atheism or naturalism, from his scientific empirical perspective, all of the things he's talking about right now are meaningless. Why even have these goals? Why even try to attain these goals? What does it mean to make up meaning or make up goals? I mean, it's what he's saying just doesn't seem to be making sense right now.
And they are a far cry from the fundamental biological goal, which is the propagation of DNA. But the machinery that enables us to set up these higher level goals is originally programmed into us by natural selection of DNA.
So here we see him trying to just fudge that gap, just to build that gap between what he's been talking about right now. Obviously, he's just maybe thought of this right now, that he's what evolution dictates is completely in contrast to what he is saying as far as meaning and purpose and goal setting is concerned in life. Now he's trying to bring those together through trying to explain why we end up with this ability to aspire towards goals and give our lives meaning from the perspective of evolution, which he hasn't justified in any way, shape or form. So what we see here is an atheist who is trying to be consistent with his atheism, but finding it a very difficult task to do so. And the reason being, as we've mentioned many times before, that on atheism or naturalism, there is no meaning to life. There is no purpose to our existence. There is no higher objective. It's you end up with existential nihilism in every shape, in every form, right? This is a difficult question in regards to meaning and purpose for an atheist and a naturalist to deal with. And you can see how Richard Dawkins himself was struggling trying to sort of provide a coherent answer. And a lot of what he said was just his wishful thinking, his ideas. It's just speculation. That's all it was. There was nothing there of any substance. There was just wishful thinking in regards to what he wants to happen after this life, etc. Now, also, one last thing I want to mention is that he actually did acknowledge that from his perspective, all you can do, the best you could do is just make things up. Right? You're making up purpose for yourself. You're making up meaning for yourself. Now, if you're happy doing this, then by all means go ahead. But for most of us, look, we don't like being lied to. And we especially don't like lying to ourselves. I mean, how can we keep just going and assuming, yeah, I have purpose, I have meaning, when we know we're just making it up? Just like, children play dress up. Kids want to become Superman and Spider-Man and Action Man. That's all you're going to be doing. I don't have meaning or purpose to my life. There is no meaning or purpose to my existence other than to pass on my DNA, and I don't really see that as a goal or something to aspire towards, as he mentioned. But yet, I'm going to make up stuff. I'm going to make up meaning for myself, and I'm going to convince myself that that's the meaning of my life. I mean, how long could we continue to lie to ourselves like this? Something for us to think about.
So like I said, the topic of this short stream, hopefully it's going to be short, is some thoughts on the response of some of the atheists in regards to the last video I put out yesterday of Richard Dawkins and his attempt to grapple with the question of the meaning of life. Now, the reactions of some of the atheists were really agitated, right? They were really angry, really agitated. Some of them were accusing me of ad hominem attacks on Richard Dawkins, just preempting and responding to a point that I haven't really understood, etc., etc. Now, I really believe one of the main reasons people are getting really agitated, and I don't think they're agitated at me necessarily, they probably are agitated at Richard Dawkins as well, but one of the reasons they are getting agitated is because through that video, looking at the response of Richard Dawkins, the way he responded to that question, it has exposed a great hole of atheism. Right, it has just lifted the veils, and it's just exposed this thing that I've been banging on about, and so many people have been speaking about, this huge hole that atheism presents humanity with, which is that it cannot provide you with an account of the meaning of life. It has no answers, right? It literally can't answer that question. It cannot explain this natural, innate human drive to seek a greater purpose. Right? Just like Richard Dawkins in the video, he says it's coming from the horse's mouth, one of the gods of new atheism, right? Just like he says it, right in the beginning of the video, the clip, you can go back to the video and watch it later on, right? The very first thing he says, well, from a biological, and I'm paraphrasing, so you can watch it for yourself, but from a biological perspective, well, the meaning to my life should be, or the goal of my life should be to propagate my genes, my DNA. However, that's not what I feel my goal or the meaning to my life is, the purpose of my life is. Very interesting, right? From a purely empirical, Darwinian, naturalistic, atheistic outlook or view, everything should be directed towards survival and reproduction. Everything should be about, we are literally machines from their perspective, biological robots that are there or that are here by accident to promote our DNA, to pass on our genes. That's all we are. Just flesh and bone that has emerged accidentally. And this is, I know it sounds morbid, but this is the reality. We are just flesh and bone. If you look at it from a very fundamental perspective, just atoms and molecules, an arrangement of atoms and molecules, matter in motion. Flesh and bone, robots, biological robots that are moving around here to propagate our DNA. Now, if that is our reality according to atheism and naturalism and the Darwinian model, if that is our reality, brothers and sisters and friends, now really, honestly, why would you sit there and say, but I don't feel that's what my purpose is? We have noble goals, as he goes on to say. How does he account for this? This is a man who speaks about evidence-based truth, like I mentioned yesterday, right? How can you account for what he's just said in this video? How does he make sense of this reality? Why would, we evolve to end up with certain mechanisms and machineries in our minds which lead us to want to acquire greater meaning, noble meaning in life, which is sometimes opposed to and sometimes the totally the opposite of passing on our genes and propagating our DNA. It just doesn't make any sense. And one thing I want to highlight here, guys, is that when Richard Dawkins does this, and I want you to go back and watch that clip when he says, well, look, from a biological perspective, our objective is X, but I don't feel this is what the meaning or the purpose of my life is. You know, we have noble goals. When he says stuff like this, what you're seeing, what we're witnessing, right? Let's call a spade a spade. What you're witnessing is the expression of the human nature, what we would call the soul. It's that nature, it's the nature, it's his nature as a human being. Forget what he calls himself, what he labels himself, what he's been come to be known as, but it's the expression of his self, his nature, which he cannot help but express. And this is what we see over and over and over again. Atheists championing humanism, the atheists speaking about animal rights, atheists adopting veganism because of those reasons or some of those reasons, you know. And to be honest, in a way it's sad to see, but in many cases it's the atheists that are on the forefronts of human rights and pushing these ideas and standing up for humanity. Yet the worldview, and I'm crying out, I'm just trying to get people to realize this, is that the worldview of atheism and naturalism cannot help you or provide any account for this natural innate drive you have. So in other words, this idea, this outlook, ideology, worldview, philosophy, whatever you want to call it, atheism and naturalism, is averse to human nature. It's averse to human nature. It strips you from accounting for your humanity. And therefore what we're seeing through the expression of atheists in reality is, here is a person who cannot help but be human, cannot help but live with a greater purpose, a greater meaning to life, cannot help but stand up for innate truths, and the things that drive us innately, such as human rights, you know, speaking out against the oppressed, speaking out against the evil, the suffering that we see in the world. They can't help but do this. But at the same time, they're adopting a worldview and ideology which just doesn't provide any account for that the way they act and the way they behave and the way they live. They're living a contradiction, right? And this is the absurdity of the whole thing. It's like, I don't understand why people would still want to hold on to such a worldview and outlook which strips you from that which makes you human. Now, obviously, some may say, well, yeah, but we can carry on living as our nature dictates us to live and behaving in that way. And we can't provide an account for it, but who cares? We just won't provide an account for it. Or fine, if you want to live a contradiction and live in such an irrational way, then be my guest. But isn't that totally contrary to what atheism and, you know, the whole sort of outlook of atheism is being rational, you know, is being you know, anything but contradictory, just being clear and evidence-based and rational and forward-thinking and consistent. Isn't that what atheists champion? Right? So it's something to really, really think about for ourselves. You know, why, if we understand these realities, would you continue to hold on to such a worldview? Now, look, on atheism and naturalism, it's going to boil down to this. If you logically follow through, here are the real options that you have. Here are the only options that you have. Stick to the raw biology, right? The idea that Dawkins initially mentioned, which is from a biological perspective, it's about passing on your DNA, your genes, right? Survival and reproduction. That's all it's about. Well, then stick to that. Yeah, even if you don't like it, or you don't feel like it's your goal or the purpose of your life, like Dawkins said, surprisingly, well, that's the reality, right? Now, if you don't want to stick to that, well, then the only other option you have is to make up meaning and purpose for yourself, as Dawkins says, and as I mentioned in the video. Now, this idea of making up meaning for yourself is not a new idea that's been promoted by Richard Dawkins. As I mentioned before, this is something that the existentialist philosophers of the 17th, 18th, and 19th century have pushed and promoted. The likes of Albert Camus, Nietzsche, as well to an extent, Sartre, and all of these types of individuals. This idea that, you know, We have to face the reality. Look, and I think Camus really sort of summarizes this in somewhat of a clear way, which is that, look, there is no meaning or purpose to life. Life is absurd. It's meaningless. Yet we have to, or the option he says that the best option to go with is we have to keep on living in search of meaning or make meaning up for ourselves. Now, this is exactly what Richard Dawkins is promoting, where we have to make up our own meaning. And sometimes they say it so easily. It's so easily said, guys. I mean, really, if you think about it, oh, yeah, we're here. There's no meaning or purpose to life, but we're going to make up meaning for ourselves. Well, okay, you just made a great assertion here, but let's think about this now. Well, firstly, what does it mean to make up meaning for yourself? If everything is inherently meaningless, then there's no meaning or point in making up meaning for yourself. It just doesn't make any sense. There's no meaning behind this, right? Now, other cool thing we could think about is, well, you know, when you say make up a meaning for yourself, aren't you just lying to yourself? When you're making something up, it's not true. You've just made it up, right? And if you're just making up meaning for yourself, is that good enough? You know, what does it mean to make something up for yourself? It's like saying, I'm gonna believe that I'm Superman. You know, I'm gonna, from today onwards, I'm gonna believe I'm Superman, that I can fly, you know, that I can help the world and I have superpowers. What does that mean? It means nothing. It's delusion, right? That's what it is. It's delusion. I'm telling myself something which is false, but I'm telling myself it maybe to help myself in some way. And again, this is you see it, it's the soul crying. It's human nature crying out for meaning and purpose. And what they're trying to do is they don't want to let go of this worldview for one reason or the other. And I'm going to touch upon this maybe in a future podcast as to why they so desperately want to hold on to this atheism, right? And to hold on to this, they have to just clutch at straws and just make up stuff. You know, the best we could do is make meaning up for ourselves and package it in a way where it's, and as some of the existentialists did, package it in a way which is appealing, you know, cushion it in language which is uplifting and empowering. Yeah, but it doesn't work. At the end of the day, look, it's just making stuff up, you know. And why would you lie to yourself in such a way, right? So you're left with literally nothing. The only true understanding of reality is that, look, on atheism and naturalism, life is meaningless, life is pointless, right? And this is a great problem, a huge problem, because look, at the end of the day, we live in this world, we live in this reality. We want to function in this world. We want to do things. We want to help people. We want to understand the world. This was what philosophy was about: understanding reality, the love of wisdom and knowledge to understand reality. Isn't the most fundamental thing that we need to understand ourselves as human beings? Isn't the greatest ontological question, what am I? You know, and then what stems from this? Why am I? What's the meaning and purpose of my existence? Isn't this the most fundamental question, which the atheists just want to brush away? And when they're asked about, such as Dawkins in that video, they have no answers. The best they can do is say, well, I don't feel this way, and we should just make up meaning for ourselves. I mean, really? Does that answer questions? And this is why I'd say that, you know, we talk about proof of God, X, Y, and Z, but just look at the worldview you're adopting and you're holding on to. There is the greatest proof that it can't answer the most fundamental. It doesn't provide an account for the most fundamental things that should be of concern to us as human beings, which is first and foremost ourselves as human beings. Isn't that good enough reason to reconsider your atheism and to look elsewhere and to see if there are any alternatives? I'm not saying come to Islam, but that's something you could look into. But I'm saying, look, isn't it just the first step to just leave that atheism and naturalism and look elsewhere as an intelligent, rational human being? You know, of course it is. But again, I can only share these things. You know, it's up to the individual to really decide what they want to do and where they want to go. And I really sort of encourage those sincere atheists who may be atheists today and agnostic, maybe agnostics, to just, you know, open your mind and really think about these realities. You know, and if you're genuinely in search of who you are and just a lover of knowledge and someone that really wants to understand reality, which I would say is a part of human nature, is to want to know, then start with ourselves. And when you start to inquire about yourself and your nature and you look into, you know, your wants and what makes you you, such as that you as a human being is purpose driven and you're searching for purpose and meaning in life, then anything that doesn't really provide an answer to that, by default, is not true, I would say. Or that's at least a great sign of the fact that it must not be true, and you have to look elsewhere. So anyway, so I wanted to share those thoughts, and that's why I believe it's really agitated. That video is really agitating some atheists, because it's exposing a great flaw, a great hole of atheism, which most atheists don't really logically think about. But what ends up happening is they end up experiencing that problem, meaning that they experience the absurd, this reality. Look, that the pain, they experience the pain of meaninglessness, of nihilism, existential nihilism at least. And obviously atheism leads to moral nihilism and all these other types of nihilism. But when most atheists don't logically think about the points I'm mentioning right now, but what happens is they end up feeling that pain of emptiness and meaninglessness, and sometimes it works backwards. They feel that, they experience that, and then they go from that to really thinking things through and understanding what I'm saying right now. And this is what I felt. Like I've said before, most atheists may not know this. I don't come from a religious background. I wasn't always a Muslim, a practicing Muslim, or even considered a Muslim. I was at the point in my life where I couldn't care less if God existed or not, leave alone the question, does God exist? I wasn't interested, right? And I experienced this myself. So I fell into that pit of nihilism, existential nihilism. And I felt the pain of the absurd, the craziness, that darkness, right? And I had to work backwards. I had to sort of understand what was going on. But why fall into that? And trust me, it's a very dark place to be, anyone that's experienced it. Why not understand it before it's too late, and to, prevent yourself from falling into that, and to make the most of the life that we have. We don't have forever. We only have 50, 60 years, guys. Come on. How long do we have? How long are we here for? Why do we think that we can waste this time? Why do we feel like we're here for an eternity? We're not. So I think that's why, going back to the point, I think that's why they're really, really agitated. And they will continue to be agitated because this is something they don't want to talk about. This is something they don't want to touch upon. They want to just leave this behind the surface, and they want to carry on doing all that sort of intellectual stuff. Arguments against God's existence. God is bad. God is evil. Religion is bad. Religion is evil. Blah, blah, blah. All of this type of stuff. But they don't want to check their houses. They don't want to see what's going on at home. Yeah. It's empty. It's meaninglessness. It's a void. It's absurd. It leads to an absurdity. It goes against your nature. And I will carry on talking about this, and I'm going to keep mentioning this and pointing this out because I've experienced it, and I know many other atheists are experiencing this too, but they just don't understand it. And this is a huge problem. And this is why, and I've mentioned many times before, and I'll wrap up on this and see if you guys have any questions, and I'll address those quickly. This is why, one of the most profound things about Islam is that it provides the answers to the most fundamental questions of humanity. Right. And one of the greatest proofs, at least for me, I'll speak for myself, right, of Islam is that it understands the human being, the human need, the human condition, the human nature. This is a book that was revealed over 1400 years ago, at a time where previous to it, you had philosophers that were pondering over these big questions, great thinkers that could not find the answers to these questions. And here comes a book in the middle of a desert to Arabs who were not known for their logic or their abilities of logic or philosophy. That's not what they were known for. They were simple people, right? The best they had was poetry, the mastery of language. And they somehow produce a book which answers the most fundamental questions to human existence, provides answers to those questions that philosophers were just going crazy over and thinking about and pondering over and just couldn't get to the bottom of. Great Greek philosophers of the time and prior to that time. Arabs provide the answer in the middle of a desert. Those that were only concerned about their honor and tribal feuds and, burying daughters alive. Honestly, you would really think that the answer, that in itself is a great sign. I mean, read the Quran, yeah? And then look into the history of the Arabs, especially at the time of revelation or prior to revelation. And things will really fall into place, right? Why didn't the Greeks and the Romans and the Persians really even consider the Arabs or worry about taking their lands over or anything like that? They were right in the middle. They just went. One of the reasons was They were worth nothing to humanity at the time. Let's face it, that was a reality, right? They had nothing to offer. And they, at that moment, let's not get to God right now, but they produced this book, apparently produced this book, which provides answers to the most fundamental questions to human nature. Brings certain teachings and morals and changes the lives of the people, that the early and the first recipients of this book, in such a way that they become role models for humanity. I mean, obviously now some of the atheists or some people will turn around who haven't looked into the history and say, oh, Islam is this, is barbaric, is backwards, is bad. Yeah, snippets that we've read on CNN and other news, through other news, mainstream media outlets and stuff. If you really take the opportunity to look into Islam and study Islam, even on a superficial level, you'll realize that this Quran, it just can't be the product of the Arabs back then in the 6th century. It's impossible. It's impossible for them to produce something like this. It's what it contains, what it talks about, is not the stuff that, a lot of it's not the stuff that the Arabs even knew of or understood at the time. The bigger questions about human nature and human existence. It blows your mind when you really think about it from that perspective. So really, and Islam answers the question of the purpose of life. God created us to worship Him, to know Him and to worship Him. God tells us in the Quran that He created us as vicegerents. Almost, if you can say, I don't know if it's the correct way to put it this way, but as representatives from one perspective on the earth. Right? God taught Adam the names of all things. God gave Adam knowledge. It's a profound story, and I'll probably share it another time, that God sent Adam to this earth, and He created this human race that were intelligent, rational, and God answers and mentions all of these things. And God created us and He sent us here for the fundamental reason to get to know our Creator, to turn back to Him and to worship Him. Knowing and understanding that one day we're going to leave this earth and we're going to return to Him. Death is going to happen. Death is something none of us can deny. It's a reality. And once we die, we return. Not as Richard Dawkins would have you believe, it's lights out, like being under general anesthetic, just not feeling anything. That's wishful thinking. That's what He wants to happen. Absolutely. I can completely relate to as to why He wants that to happen. But who's come and told Him, that's going to happen? What, the angel of some dead scientist or the ghost of some dead scientist has come to him and whispered to him in the ear that's what Dawkins, when you die, that there's nothing after death? Well, if that was the case, then, there is something after death, because something from beyond has come and mentioned that to him. But what has told him this? Science can't step into that realm. So what makes him so certain of the fact that there's going to be nothing after he dies? If anything, he should although he's an atheist, he should remain agnostic about that point. Uncertain. And that uncertainty should get him to think. And that, again, with all atheists. If you're uncertain as to what's going to happen after death, that's good enough reason to inquire about what may happen after death. So it's another reason why we should sort of look beyond atheism. But anyway, I'm going to stop ranting now. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to just go through your questions quickly and see if there's any thing that I can address, inshallah. Yeah, so I've answered this question. Axim, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. I've answered this question previously in a previous live stream or a video about how does atheists respond to people should believe in God, since it's adaptive, makes people. So I'm assuming what you mean is that the claim that atheists make, where they say, people believe in God because it makes them happy, provides comfort, etc., etc. I've mentioned this a few videos before, but the general point is, see, the argument that they're making, and again, Dawkins makes this argument. Many other people throughout history have made this argument. Karl Marx made the similar point. Harari in his book Sapiens, or in his lectures, has made a similar point as well. And the idea is this: because religion provides comfort and is useful and may make you happy, etc., therefore it's made up. That's the argument. That's not really an argument. It doesn't logically follow. Just because something is useful, therefore it's false. No. If it's useful, it could be true too. Right? And it could be useful because it's true from the Islamic perspective, at least, because we know God created the human being in human nature. God is the one that sent revelation. He is the one that's told us this is guidance for humanity. Therefore, it's bound to be useful because it comes from the one that knows us best, the creator of everything that exists. So the door swings both ways. I don't see why. It's not really an argument, to be honest. It's just a point that they try to push, which I don't think is valid in any way, shape, or form. Okay, here's an interesting question. Faizan Ali says Dawkins believes that the purpose of life could be subjective. Well, he does believe that that's made up. Then why does he attack someone who is a theist? Very good point, bro. That's a very interesting way of looking at it, which is, look, if according to you, the meaning of life, the purpose of life is something you just make up, then what's your problem with what you believe about theists who make up another purpose of life? You know, how can you say it's wrong and yours is right when it's all just wishful thinking and, something you make up? It just doesn't make any sense. Grey Wolf says, did Dawkins forget science does not care about his feelings? Well, yeah, that's exactly what seems to be the case. And to be honest, he's not the only one. Trust me, ask any atheist, same question. They'll probably fumble and stumble in similar ways, right? They may be articulate. They may have good use of rhetoric and even sophistry to the point where they can sort of cover up the problem. But if you really pay attention, you will notice similar problems. And absolutely, look, he's not sticking to his science when it comes to his feelings. So yeah, it's a good point. Philosopher MMA says, make a video on Christopher Hitchens. He seems to be the favorite of all atheists. If Hitchens was a rhetorician who had good use of sophistry, that's all he was. He had no sound arguments. If anything, there's atheists that are critiquing him now as well. I think Cosmic Skeptic put something out regarding Hitchens's style or his approach. I haven't read it myself yet, but yeah, I've actually got a video of Hitchens on my channel where Hitchens' brother challenges Hitchens on morality. It's a very interesting little video. You definitely go check that out as well. Okay, so philosopher MMA follows refuting him. Yeah, Cosmic Skeptic made a video about Hitchens. Yeah, he did. Meaning to an atheist is following your pleasure, but pleasure is not. Let's put this up. But pleasure is not a conscious decision. Yeah, I think I see what you're saying here, Catch-22. But it's a very good point. It's all about. See, one of the reasons, and I'm going to probably do another live stream on this later. If we really understand the flaws of atheism and the holes of atheism and how it's like, look. If you have a body, and I'm just thinking of an analogy now, yeah, and there's bullet wounds, right? It's been if a body's been shot in different places, right? The worst of places someone could be shot is right in the heart here, right in the center of the chest, or up here in the brain, right? What's happened, and this is a metaphor. I'm not saying, hopefully no one misconstrues this in any way, in any wrong way. I just couldn't think of a better analogy right now. And my analogies aren't great, yeah. So just bear with me. I get the point of what I'm saying. So imagine there's a body it's being shot in different places. It's the worst place you could be shot is in the head or in the heart. The holes of atheism is right here and right here. It removes the meaning and the purpose to human existence, the fundamental questions that human beings have, right? The holes are so great, you just can't imagine how this body, the atheism, is living. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think one of the reasons is, and there's several reasons that I believe it is, but one of the reasons is because it removes accountability and it allows for you to fulfill your pleasures. That's what it does, right? It removes accountability and it allows for you to fulfill your pleasures. And I think that's one of the reasons people still hold on to this ideology and this view. And we can discuss this. I may do a more detailed video on this later. Inshallah, God willing. Yeah, this is another good point. Hassan Suhail says, maybe it gives them a sense of independence. Very delusional if you ask me. Now, let me just preface this discussion. If there's any atheists watching this, look, I, at least personally, and I really encourage all the Muslims here too, we don't have a problem with human beings. We don't have a problem with atheists or people that call themselves atheists. If anything, we try to have genuine concern towards humanity because it's a part of our religion to care about human beings and to pass on the message to human beings. The reason I'm pointing these things out is because I want people to realize that they are ascribing to a delusion which is leading them nowhere good. it will lead them to destruction in this life and in the hereafter. And I'm concerned about this. And one reason I'm really furthermore concerned about this is because this is something I've experienced myself, right? And I don't want anyone else to experience this. So absolutely, it does give atheists a sense of independence, human beings a sense of independence. That we're good, where I can take care of myself. I am my own deity from that perspective. So let's see. Okay, I'm just going to quickly flick through this. Okay, it's up khair, guys. Okay, I'm getting to the bottom of it now, so just bear with me. Sure, that is Islam. Okay, this is a good question. It's slightly different. So Wagajani says, I think I'm saying your name right. Apologies if I'm pronouncing it wrong. A person asking, not necessarily an atheist, what makes you so sure that Islam is the true religion to follow, as compared to other religions like Hinduism? Can't take deistic approach. Okay, so there is many proofs of Islam. Okay, there are many rational arguments we can share that prove that Islam is the truth and the Quran is the truth. But with me personally, you probably realize this, guys, by now as well. Although I love arguments and I think they have a profound role to play, but I'm not really an argument or logical, rational argument type of guy. I like to touch upon and mention things which are intuitively true, right? And that we can pick up on intuitively as human beings. And I think intuition is a great tool that we've been blessed with as human beings, which can lead us to the truth. When it comes, for me personally, here's what's profound. Islam, number one, it is in line with human nature. It's in line with human nature, and number two, it answers the most fundamental questions to human existence in the most clear and profound way. Number three, it's internally coherent and consistent. A book that's revealed over 26 years at different times, addressing different problems in different situations. When you read it today, it's completely coherent and consistent. That needs to be understood under the context of that Islam, or that the Quran follows its own logic in writing, right? There's a video on my channel it's an epistemic show which talks about Greek logic versus Semitic logic, and the way writing conforms to one of these two, or not at least these two logics, and how the Quran is in Semitic logic. It follows a certain pattern. Just because the modern Western person can't understand or perceive that pattern immediately, it doesn't mean it's incoherent, right? Then once you understand the pattern, the way it's structured, then when you study it, it's completely internally coherent and it makes sense, right? So those are the main reasons. Another reason is Islam mentions that God has sent messengers throughout history that brought the same fundamental message, which is to worship God, to know God, to do good in this life, and that we will return to Him, and that there is an afterlife. This reality can be observed through human history. When you study human history, brother Jerry has done some phenomenal work on this. I'm going to get him onto a live stream very soon. And he highlights that you see that pattern emerge. You see the truth of what God is saying in Islam in history. That people were given revelation. The initial understanding was monotheism, and then that was distorted over time. So all of these realities, and there's much more, the fact that it's preserved. That the Quran, again, God makes a prophet. There's a prophecy in the Quran. God says that He has revealed it, He will preserve it. If you look at the Quran, it is preserved. Many, many proofs like this that we can share with people, inshallah. And finally, I think one of the most amazing things is, I would say, and I always say, just read it. Be honest, be sincere, be open-minded, just read the Quran and see what it says to you. And and I really believe if someone is sincere and honest, and God is going to guide him, that will be sufficient for that person, inshallah. Okay, let's see. Here's a good point. Akzir, I think that's how you say your name. MashaAllah, you guys have some very beautiful and unique names. I'm struggling, MashaAllah, to say your names. He says, atheists get frustrated by the difficult questions like morality, so they refer to baseless insults. Absolutely. There are some fundamental things that atheists do not like to speak about, and you will see this pattern emerge. Morality is one of them, but I think the greatest one is the meaning of life, the purpose of life. This is something they don't want to touch on, the absurdity of life on atheism, the logical implications of atheism. They don't want to talk about these things. They are happy talking about God's existence. They are happy critiquing God's existence, etc. Okay, so I think I'll end on this point. I think this is a very good question or point that Musa is making. How many debates do atheists want? Now, I think this question he's put out is a very relevant one, and something we should think about ourselves. Brothers and sisters, first and foremost, I'll speak to you guys. Look, atheists will keep debating God's existence till the cows come home. They're not going to stop doing this. Atheists will continue to live. Atheists will continue to exist. People will continue to become atheists. The very first thing we need to do, if we're looking to, and as we are, mashallah, most of you guys are engaging with atheists. The very first thing I'll recommend you guys to do is to focus on yourself, especially now Ramadan coming up, is to really pull back and focus on yourself. This is something I'm intending on doing as well. You know, I've got a huge reading list right now. I've got like probably 15 different books that I'm flicking through and going through at the moment. I'm going to pause all of that for Ramadan, right? And I'm going to try to pause all of that and put all of those books aside and just focus on the basics. Go back to our tradition. Because wallahi, brothers and sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God has blessed us with a truth which we're not giving enough importance to. If we really analyze how much time we're spending studying atheism, philosophy, all of these things, and how much time we're spending studying the Quran and our tradition, we will see an imbalance. And I see that for myself sometimes as well, which I'm really worried about. So I'm going to go back to the drawing board and I'm going to pull back and try to get the balance right. Remember, we can point the holes out and we can debate with atheists till the cows come home, right? But sometimes what we forget doing is we get caught up in discussing the philosophical arguments and rational arguments with them, when at the end of the day, maybe something better we could do for them and ourselves is just to share the message of the Quran, which is universal, which is intuitive. Share the ayat of the Quran with clear understanding, right? Really study the ayat of the Quran. Master, I would say master. Go through the Quran. I'll say even do this, maybe as an idea. Go through the Quran. As you come across ayat when you're reading the Quran, which stick out to you from a dawah perspective, things you can mention to atheists, put little post-it notes there, right? Colored post-it notes, underline them, then return to them, then study those verses in depth, study the morphology of those verses, the words, the in-depth meaning of the words, study the tafsir on the verses. Then after you've done that, ponder over the verses for yourself. What meanings can you derive or understanding can you derive from the verses which apply to today in the 21st century? Make the verses, memorize those verses, make them a part of yourself. And then trust me, when you engage with the atheists and you bring those verses, when they've entered your heart and become a part of your being, and they've shaped your thinking, and when you convey those to those non-Muslims and those atheists, it would have such a great impact, inshallah, God willing, on those people. We won't even be able to imagine it. The Quran is the greatest tool of da'wah, period. Period. No argument, no philosophical argument, nothing else matches that. Maybe that's something we need to do and something I've been thinking about as well. You know, the holes of atheism are evident. They're there. We've pointed them out. We've already come across them. We are aware of them. All you need to do is mention 2 or 3 things to some atheists, and if they are sincere and honest, they would understand, okay, this worldview, this ideology is not adding up. You don't need to give them a critical analysis of the whole of atheism. We can't do that anyway. Atheism has taken many shapes and forms throughout history. In history, some of the Christians would refer to other Christians as atheists, right? At one point in history, atheism meant when someone went against, or when a certain Christian sect went against the orthodoxy, right? Atheism has taken many shapes throughout history, right? You can't deal with the whole of atheism, right? It's impossible. Yes, we see a new atheist movement which is dying down now. I really believe it's dying down. But once you've pointed out the flaws, what we need to do is we need to master what Allah has given us. Once we master that and we start sharing that light with the world, brothers and sisters, wallahi, I'm not joking, it will change people. It will move people. And those whose hearts are closed and they're arrogant, they don't want to listen, you can bring anything to them, they're not going to listen. As Allah says in the Quran, God says in the Quran, even we send down parchment from heaven, scripture written on special paper, almost alien paper, something that just they saw coming down in front of them and they could feel it with their own hands and experience it with their own senses, they would still deny it. That is the reality of some people, and we just have to understand this. There will be some people that will never believe you. So don't get frustrated if your logical, rational, our logical, rational arguments aren't working. It's not the fault of the argument or the weakness of the argument, right? It's just the case that some people will never come around. That's in the hands of Allah. We need to just give them the best we can give them, and the best we can give them is the Quran. So think about shaping our dawah, making our dawah more Quranic, inshallah. That's something I really want us to focus on going forward. And we have to do this as a collective. Honestly, I see you guys, mashallah, there's like a family that's building on this channel. And I see the same names emerging over and over again, mashallah. Some of you have messaged me privately, and I try to answer and respond to your comments the best I can. And I consider within that family some of the atheists that come onto this channel too. Right? That the honest ones, the ones that are looking and that are searching. So let's really help each other out and advise each other, and let's try to sort of really take a positive direction in our da'wah, meaning our conveyance of the truth with people. Absolutely. And I'm going to put this point up, and we're going to end on this. Lennis says we have to do our job to give the message, but hidayah is from Allah. Jazakallah khair, brother Lennis. May Allah bless you. What a beautiful point to conclude on, which is all our job is to deliver the message in the clearest way possible. That's all we have to do, right? We don't have to argue. We don't have to debate. We don't have to unnecessarily get into unnecessary debates and arguments. Just deliver the message, make it clear for people, and leave the rest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, leave the rest to God. God guides who He wills, and this is the reality. You know, atheists think they can take the role of a judge, and that that they can have God on trial in court, and they can decide whether God exists or not. No, it's not going to work like that. That's the height of arrogance. You know, a being that comes from a dirty drop of fluid, as God says in the Quran, where Allah says, خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ مِن نُطْفَةٍ. This dirty, God created this human being, all of these atheists included, from a dirty drop of fluid. All of these atheists, you know, these aggressive types that are very active on the online, on the keyboard, typing away arguments, X, Y, and Z. About 30 years ago, they were a drop of dirty liquid, right? The one that brought them from that state into the state they're in today, they are denying Him. You know, that is the height of delusion. Literally. And as God says, خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ مِن نُطْفَةٍ فَإِذَا هُوَ خَصِيمٌ مُبِينٌ. And then this very creation that was a drop of dirty liquid not too long ago stands in front of God as an open contender, a challenger, challenging God. Look at the profound words of Allah, God just highlighting the reality of what we're seeing taking place today. So don't overstress yourselves in the dawah. Just the last piece of advice. Just ensure that we get the message across in the clearest way possible to people, and leave the rest to Allah. I'll conclude on that. Thank you guys for tuning into the live. Make sure to share this. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't subscribed already.